The world of feminist horror fiction is a wild and wicked place. However, it's also a surprisingly complicated one. Because when you sit down and look at it, a lot of feminist horror fiction is actually written by men. And a lot of that fiction by men is surprisingly competent. And we're going to talk about that. And then there's also a kind of interesting distinction that you can make between feminist horror and feminine horror. And then there's also the overlap between feminist horror and queer horror, especially sapphic horror or even transfemme horror. So you can already see how these waters get murky, but that murkiness is in and of itself interesting. So let's talk about the complex but undeniably wild and wicked world of feminist horror fiction. And if any of the books that I talk about here in this video pique your interest, the best way to read them is by the glow of a serious light, which happens to be incredibly apt since this video is sponsored by Serious Readers, the makers of Serious Lights. Let's take a random book as an example. What's this? Oh, this is Managing and Other Lies by me. The very last story in this book is an explicitly feminist horror story with a gnarly twist. And I can't imagine a better way to read this than curled up in an armchair with nothing to illuminate you and the book but this serious light. Well, not exactly this one's mine. You can't have this one, but you can have your own serious light. And then you can read my book by the glow of that serious light and it'll just be lovely. Well, not lovely. It is a horror story. Every single evening, I curl up in my armchair, I turn on my serious light, and I lose myself in a book. And the sheer amount that serious lights help with your immersion as you're reading is incredible. With its adjustable beam and its dimmer switch, you can create just the right kind of immersive lighting environment. This perfect little world in which only you and your book exist, illuminated by your own private sun, a serious light. This thing is the best reading companion that I have ever had, and right now you can go down into the description, click the link, and use the offer code WILLOW to get £150 off your serious light. Your reading experience will change forever. Thank you so much to Serious Readers for sponsoring this video. So what makes a horror story explicitly feminist? Well, ordinarily I would say that the book would have to be written by a woman, but I don't think that anymore. And we'll talk about that in a sec. I think a feminist horror story has to be a horror story that deals with themes of feminism, which seems very obvious, but what are those themes? Well, as we take a look at a few examples of feminist horror fiction, you're going to see some recurring themes. And arguably the biggest one of all is feminine agency, and adjacent to that is feminine liberation. Many of the great works of feminist fiction, whether they're horror or not, deal with the freedom, the agency, and the liberation of women. And then you get ones that are a little more complicated and arguably subtle, like The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. The one time I don't wear my Shirley Jackson shirt. And then there's also the thing I mentioned at the beginning, that curious overlap between feminist horror and feminine horror, like Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This is a horror novel written by a woman about women. But is it feminist horror? Because the horror in this story is between two women. It is a sapphic novel. It is sapphic horror, where the monster and the victim are both women, and they are women in a sapphic relationship. So it's queer, it's feminine. Is it feminist? No, not really. But also, yeah, maybe? Up until like a week ago, I would have said no, but then I read another book that had me thinking differently. And that book is The Lamb by Lucy Rose. So many people are calling this a feminist horror novel, but as I read it, I thought to myself, yeah, okay, it's about women and it's by a woman. Is it explicitly feminist? Well, when you hear something enough, but it's something that you don't quite understand or agree with, it's a good idea to sit with it and see if you can come to understand and realize what people are saying. And over time, I did. The Lamb is a feminist horror story in part because it is entirely about terrible women being terrible in this small, terrifying little existence that they have carved out for themselves within our wider patriarchal society. The women in this story are dangerous, cannibalistic monsters. And while they are not freeing themselves from the shackles of patriarchy, this is still a story of liberation because these women have their freedom. They've created a terrifying little world of their own, a world of women being bad, which in and of itself feels incredibly feminist, because you feel liberated just thinking about that, however dark and terrifying it might be. So then where does that leave Bloom? Bloom begins as a romance until that romance becomes toxic and ultimately dangerous and terrifying. This is the story of a sapphic relationship in which one woman slowly realizes that she is the victim of another dangerous woman. There are no men in the story. This is a tale that highlights that yes, women are often victims. We know this. We say this all the time. It remains terrifyingly true that women are so often victims of men. But it's also a story that serves to remind us that women can be dangerous too. Women can have teeth. Women can be cruel. And that humanization of women as the potential to be dangerous is also arguably a thematically feminist point. Mulling all of this over as I read The Lamb and then thought about Bloom, this really got me thinking about themes and politics and social dynamics in a much more nuanced and deep way than I typically do. And I was really happy about that. I was happy to realize that, yeah, this is feminine horror, but it is also arguably feminist. Sapphic love is in and of itself a feminist thing because it's romance that shuns men. It shuns patriarchy. A lot of men don't like lesbians because they are excluded from the party. Patriarchal men need to make sure that the world revolves around them, and in a sapphic relationship, men don't exist at all. Men are not welcome in this space. Then it turns out that one of those women is dangerous and frightening. That only adds to the sense of feminine agency. It is liberating to remember that women create a complete world in and of themselves in which love exists, as does danger and threat, good versus bad, victim versus monster. All of that exists without men being a part of the story at all. And that is feminist. Now, I have to admit, when I hit record, I didn't actually expect to argue with myself and discuss themes first and foremost. I thought I would talk about a bunch of books and then get into all of this, but I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about the themes of feminism and what exactly constitutes feminism within the horror genre. And now I need to talk a little bit more about this. I love this book. You might have heard about The Lamb. It is a book that has gotten a lot of attention recently. So many people are calling it the best book of this year. I had one person tell me that it's their favorite book of all time. As soon as they read it, they knew it was their favorite book ever. But what is it? The Lamb is the debut novel of British filmmaker Lucy Rose. It's set in a very rural part of northern England, and our protagonist is the young preteen daughter of a fairy tale monster. Kind of. Margot's mother, who is mostly just referred to as Mama throughout the entire story, is a cannibal. Now and again, she finds people who are lost in the forest in which she lives. Those people might knock on her door, or they might just stumble onto the grounds of her home. And she takes those people in, and she refers to them as strays. They are homeless in a thematic sense rather than a literal one. They might have homes, but they are strays in the sense that they seem to be lost. Maybe they wander without purpose. They don't seem to be concrete people. They are confused. They do not have a sense of density. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of people can relate to. I have many times in the past felt like a stray. Someone who wanders, someone who doesn't feel like they have a purpose or a clear vision of who they are and who they want to be. Those are strays. And Mama believes that they're fodder, they're cattle, they're things that she can eat, literally. And so she takes those strays in and she makes them happy and comfortable and she lures them into her fairy tale place. And then she kills them, and then she cooks them, and then she eats them. And she's been feeding them to Margot her entire life. Margot's father left a long time time ago, and we hear them talk about him occasionally. Margot doesn't always feel comfortable with her situation. She gets the sense that there is something wrong. She goes to school every single day, and she's told explicitly by her mother, do not talk about the uniqueness of our life together. And then a stray comes along, a young woman named Eden. But Eden slowly reveals that she is, in fact, not a stray. In fact, it's quite the opposite. She feels a kinship with Margot's mother, and so she moves in. She takes on their mission, and she works together with Margot's mother to catch and kill the strays. Margot, over the course of the story, starts to feel pushed out. She starts to feel like the outlier. She doesn't trust Eden. Eden and her mother are steadily falling in love. But is the love that Eden feels actually the same as what Mama feels? Margot doesn't think so. She doesn't trust Eden. And I won't tell you where the story goes from there. But like Bloom, this is a wonderfully feminist story because men don't exist in it. And when they do, they are victims, they are outliers and bystanders, they are strays. They come in and offer advice. For example, there is a bus driver that every day takes Margot to school, and she leans on him and she gets advice from him. But these men are not central to this story. I referred to it as a fairy tale, and a lot of people have. In many ways, it feels like a prequel to Hansel and Gretel, in much the same way that Wicked is a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, or Maleficent is a prequel to Sleeping Beauty. We are following the life of the wicked witch who lives in the cottage in the forest, who steals people away and kills them and eats them in this little world that she has carved out, a world of dangerous women, a mother and a daughter, and eventually another woman being allowed into this world, passing through the barrier into this dangerous place where she is permitted to live with them and to love them in this world without men. And don't get me wrong, it is a world of terror and hunger, but it is a feminine world. And then we get stories like this one, Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. Natural beauty is a lot of things. It's exploring a lot of different themes. It is not explicitly feminist, but feminism is one of the themes. This is a book about consumerism and capitalism. It's a story about race and culture and identity. It's also a story about agency, feminine agency in a feminist context, but also the agency of someone who is an immigrant, the agency of someone who is an ethnic minority, the agency of someone who is a woman in a patriarchal system in a more capitalistic sense. There's a lot going on. Now, Ling Ling Huang's main job is as a violinist. She plays as part of a Grammy award-winning orchestra in New York, and she has siphoned her music knowledge and experience into this story. Her nameless protagonist in Natural Beauty is a piano prodigy, the child of two Chinese immigrants who moved to New Jersey to escape the Cultural Revolution. There they raised our protagonist, who went on to study at a conservatory in New York City. She studied there for 8 years, and she was the top student. She was destined for great things, to be one of the great living pianists. And then, after her final exam performance, her parents were in a car crash. They are both now severely disabled and living in this special care unit, which she has to pay for. That means that she can't live out her dream of being a pianist just yet, if ever. She had to go get a regular job at a restaurant. And very, very quickly, she is spotted and recognized by someone who works for this fancy beauty brand. A woman who invites her to come work for this brand immediately. The brand is called Holistic, and Holistic makes beauty products. These products are obsessed over by so many people. And over the course of the novel, as she works there, she learns more and more about the company, about how it operates, and also, most intriguingly, about her colleagues. There's a lot that I could give away, and I really don't want to. But if you're a fan of The Substance, for example, you're going to kind of get the vibe of this story. And I do feel like we are getting to a point where there are so many kind of capitalism-critical feminist stories about consumer products and the beauty industry, etc., etc. These novels and movies are starting to pile up. And usually they are unique. Even though I've compared this to The Substance, having finished the book, it goes to to some insane places. You will not guess how this book ends. You will not guess half of the twists in it, and it is jam-packed full of them. While working at Holistic, she is able to get lots of treatments, and so she does, and her colleagues have gotten so many. In fact, I'm going to give away one twist that happens maybe a third of the way through the book, just to give you an idea of what the book is driving at. Our protagonist is approached to change her name from a Chinese name to an English name in order to make her more palatable to the customers who come in, most of whom are rich white people. And it's here that she learns that so many of her white and bleach blonde colleagues are in fact of various different ethnic minorities. And they've all had so much work done on their skin and their bones and their hair, and they've all changed their names to things like Courtney and Brittany, that she had no idea they weren't white. And it's at this point that you start to realize the themes of homogenization and beauty standards. Since AI has become a bigger and bigger deal and a bigger and bigger part of our lives, we have heard stories about how AI is racist. How if you ask an AI art generator to create a beautiful woman, it will show you a tall, thin, blonde, white woman. Feminine beauty standards are inherently colonialist, white, racist things. We can even bring transphobia into this as well. Every single time a gender-critical person like J.K. Rowling has accused a sports person or an Olympian of being trans, that person has always been an ethnic minority. That is transphobic, sure, but it's also incredibly misogynistic and racist. And it's that intersection between sexism and racism that this book is exploring so brilliantly. Natural Beauty is such a wonderful example of how feminism/sexism can be weaved into other themes and bigger ideas and still be, obviously, inherently feminist because it is so stitched into the text. Sexism and racism kind of go hand in hand in this story, as does anti-capitalism, and more themes besides, but I could talk about this for ages. I think I already have. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that one of the key themes when it comes to feminist horror is agency and liberation, and that is so on the nose true for Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. I've done a full video about this book. It is one of my favorite novels of this year so far. Hungerstone is a retelling of Carmilla, which in itself is a feminist horror story, even though it was written by a man in the 19th century. But Hungerstone pushes the feminist themes a lot further, and despite being an historical novel set in 1888, it is still more modern and has themes that reflect the things that we talk about when it comes to feminism and feminine liberation today. In Hungerstone, our protagonist is married to a rich business owner, a man who oversees a factory of workers. A factory of workers who don't have enough rights, enough safety measures, and he is not a kind boss. Right then and there, we have themes of class struggle, of capitalism, and of patriarchy, of powerful men taking charge and taking control and taking advantage of poorer working class people. And as he's doing all of that, our protagonist meets Carmilla, a vampire. And Carmilla in this story very much represents those themes of feminine freedom and agency and liberation. She invites our protagonist not just to fall in love with her and enter a sapphic relationship with her, but more importantly than that, to break her shackles, to free herself from the bonds of patriarchy, to take control of her own life, to figure out who she is outside of being the wife to a cruel capitalist. Who is she? What is her name? What is her purpose? What does she want to look like and feel like? How is she going to take control of her own life? Carmilla, as a feminine force of nature, comes along like a whirlwind, a bloodthirsty whirlwind, to give her all of that, or at least push her in the right direction. And the result of all of that is absolutely wild. This is an incredible journey. The novel is subtle and slow when it needs to be, and at other times it feels like a storm, a very feminine, very sapphic, and at times very bloodthirsty storm. I love this book so much. And then we have feminist horror fiction from all around the world, which is something that I think deserves its own video, so look forward to that in the future. But here are two examples. The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez, and Revenge by Yoko Ogawa. These are two of my favorite authors in the whole wide world. Enriquez is from Argentina, and this short story collection is, on the surface, very much about Buenos Aires. Every single story in here teaches you about that city, about its history, its culture, its traditions, its art. But these are also explicitly feminist stories about witchcraft and revenge. These are folk horror tales that teach you about the more feminine traditions of the city, of its culture, of the wider country of Argentina. These stories are strange, sometimes eerily quiet, other times explosive and dangerous. And the way that they blend a celebration of the city of Buenos Aires with a celebration of feminine feminist folk horror is really outstanding. And then we have one of my favorite Japanese authors, Yoko Ogawa. Revenge is also a short story collection, and, well, you get what it's about from the title. Every story in here is about revenge, and they are also subtly interconnected stories. Now, it's been a long time since I read this, so I don't remember any of the stories with any real clarity. But they are stories of women taking revenge. Not just on men, but in more interesting and dynamic ways as well. Once again, this is a book about feminine agency, about women doing whatever they want to take revenge. Women who are embittered, women who have been damaged, women who have had their safety shattered, women who are angry, women who are toxic, women who do what they like in order to take revenge on the people who have hurt them, however they hurt them and whoever they are. That is a celebration of feminine agency within horror. But as I said at the beginning, men can write good feminist horror as well. A lot of people point to Stephen King and stories like Misery and Carrie, or even novels that are less overtly about horror, like Dolores Claiborne, which is such an incredible story. And while I do agree that Stephen King has written a whole bunch of really interesting stories about feminine agency and about women being monsters and women being dangerous and women reclaiming their freedom and their own choices, etc., I want to talk here about one of my favorite horror authors, Grady Hendris. Now, I recently did a video all about Grady Hendris, so I'm not going to belabor the point, you can go watch that video. But Grady Hendris, as I said in that video, almost always writes women. And not only that, not only are his protagonists almost always women, but his stories are also always political. They might be about class, they might be about race, and they might be about feminism, as is the case with his newest book, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, which is set in 1970 in a house full of pregnant teenagers. These are young, vulnerable girls who have been taught that what they did was their fault and their responsibility, and they must bleed and hurt and pay for it. And the people who are looking after them are all women who have been taught this by patriarchy, by Western American interpretations of Christianity, and they buy it and they sell it and they push it and they believe it, and it is so sad. And the teenage boys who played a very vital part in this pregnancy, do they suffer? No. Are they punished? Are they shamed? Are they belittled? No. This is a book about the teenage girls who are forced to feel awful and to go through so much pain. Not just the pain of pregnancy and labor, but the emotional turmoil and the physical abuse enacted on them by patriarchy and its servants. All because they got pregnant in a situation and a time in their life where it wasn't deemed suitable or proper. And when the opportunity to turn to witchcraft rears its head, of course, they take it, and they have fun doing it. Grady Hendris, in my opinion, is an incredible writer of women characters. He's so good at not just writing women protagonists, but at writing about sexism and patriarchy and feminine struggles. The tortures and the traumas that are put on women by patriarchal values. He is amazing at it, and he proves, at least in my mind, that a sensible and empathetic and talented male writer can write women and feminist themes as well as any woman. Grady Hendris is fantastic, and I have so much endless praise for how he writes women and writes about feminine agency and writes about sexism and other social and political themes. This guy is great. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I had a lot to say, a lot to ruminate on, and I was kind of digesting a lot of my own thoughts as I was going. And if you have your own thoughts based on what I've said, if you disagree with me, if you have things to add, please let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, you can also hit the like button and go a little bit further into the description where you'll find links to my book. If you've enjoyed this video, you're going to enjoy my book. This is, after all, a collection of queer, feminist, trans horror stories. So treat yourself to a copy and let me know what you think once you've read it. Thank you. Subscribe for books.